So welcome everyone to this episode of Ask Daniel, where for the first time we have a co-host and none but Martin Reed, my good friend and colleague. Welcome, Martin.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited, looking forward to this.
I've been as I shared with you, and I shared on the channel too. I've been thinking about this for a while. It'd be really fun to kind of answer questions together. So we'll do that in a second. But oh, by the way, for anyone that does not know Martin, he actually came physically to me here in episode 108, where he talks a little bit about his story and how he got into insomnia coaching. But uh, overall, with your course and everything, how are things going, Martin?
Yeah, things are going good. I mean, there's two ways of looking at it, right? It's good for me, but probably not a good reflection on society as a whole, that all these people are still struggling with insomnia, unfortunately. And I think a lot of it is to just do with the messaging that's out there, things that myself and you, other people are trying to work against, just to prevent this proliferation of doom and gloom around insomnia, which just leads to more worry. I mean, good for business, but not good for the people, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely. And speaking of that, there's actually a question today about not the classic one, which you and I always worry when there's always this fear mongering, but this one is more about like, we'll get to it in a second, but it's a good question on topic here. But that said, let us just jump in and before we start reading some emails. I want to say my usual disclaimer that nothing here is medical or specific advice to anyone. It's just general thoughts and advice that applies to anyone that has the type of problems that the person writing to us asks about. So let's jump in here, and I'm gonna read this message, an email actually I got. What was this? One day ago, and then we can talk about it. So it said the following. Hi, Dr. Erickson. I'm 3 weeks into CBTi and I've hit a wall. My sleep schedule started out as 12:30 to 6:30. I stuck to it, and for the past week, I've moved my bedtime back 15 minutes to 12:15 a.m. So it's actually 12:30 a.m. to 6:30. However, I've run into a couple of problems. The 3 weeks of 5 to 6 hours of sleep, sometimes less, are starting to bite. I feel bloody wretched, and I don't know how long I can continue before it really starts to affect my daily life. And although I've had many successful nights, the past few weeks have been rough. I only got 3 hours last night and frequent awakenings every night before that. My biggest problem is I feel like I have no margin for error because I'm only in bed for 6 hours. I feel like any issues I have are magnified. Despite constant focus on CBT, behavioral techniques, and stimulus control, I'm struggling to shut my worrying, racing mind off. How do I push through this wall? Is there anything I could change? Happy to provide more info. Thanks. This is from Rob. So in summary here, started CBT, had kind of a narrow sleep window, struggling in the first weeks, not shutting main off, et cetera, et cetera. What are your reactions to this?
Yeah, well, there's a lot to pick apart there. The first thing I would say is that none of that is particularly unusual. Some people do respond really quickly to this sleep window, the sleep restriction. Just within a week, they notice more sleepiness and more consolidated sleep. For other people, it might be, 4 weeks, maybe 6 weeks of consistent implementation to notice that. So first of all, I'd just reassure, was it Rob?
Rob, yeah.
I would just reassure Rob that there's nothing particularly unusual here, especially when you're seeing those anxious thoughts, that racing mind. Because really, the sleep window doesn't do all that much to address the racing mind. All we're really doing with that sleep window is just trying to build some more sleep drive during the day. The stronger your sleep drive, sometimes to a certain extent, it can be a little bit easier to get past that initial worry or anxiety. But really, we're just trying to make sure that you're going to bed when you're sleepy enough for sleep and that you're observing this consistent out of bedtime. And it can take time for you to adapt to that and to recognize these symptoms of these sleepiness cues, especially when you've got that worry and anxiety. So I would suggest to keep going, with the sleep window. Not try to spend too much time examining it, especially like on a night-to-night basis, like, because when you do that, your mind just wants to focus on the worst nights that you've had, So, for example, last night I only got 3 hours, but were there any other nights over the past couple of weeks where you got more than 3 hours? Probably they were,
Which there
right?
were. He said he had many successful nights.
Yeah, but the mind just wants to focus on the worst possible night, which is normal and to be expected, because the brain doesn't need to troubleshoot when you've had a good night, but it feels it has to when you have a night of struggle. So I'd say to just try and keep going, not try to analyze your sleep on a night-to-night basis. Just kind of engage that robot mind, give yourself at least a week, maybe 2 weeks before you reflect back and think, okay, am I tending to fill that sleep window now? And remember that the goal is not to fill that sleep window with sleep. We just want to reduce the amount of time you're spending awake. So don't put pressure on yourself to fill that sleep window with sleep. As soon as you put pressure on yourself to do anything related to sleep, you're going to make sleep more difficult. And then the final point, to do with those anxious thoughts is often it's helpful to see if you can identify what the thought is that's generating that anxiety. Because anxiety doesn't just appear from nowhere. It's a response to a thought that we have. So, for example, it might be, let's say you wake up during the night and the automatic thought is, I've woken up, I'm not going to fall back to sleep. And then as a result of that thought, you become anxious. Okay. So you identify that thought and then you can kind of evaluate it and just think to yourself, well, how accurate is this thought? Have there ever been times in the past where I've woken during the night and I have been able to fall asleep? Because we're not looking to refute that thought and to kind of prove yourself wrong. We're just looking to see how accurate it is. And often when you do that, you can kind of pick away at it and you can see that thought that seemed 100% true at the time isn't as accurate as it first seemed. And that in itself can really reduce that worry and anxiety that the thought is generating.
100%. I agree with everything. And to kind of spin off what you said, I think it's super important when you have those, like, as Rob mentioned, I had some successful nights. Any little positive thing that happens in the first 3 weeks is like, make it a huge deal, like tell somebody about it, like, and the more you play that up, the more that, the more that's going to boost your confidence. Super important. And I also want to say, I think similar to you, Martin, that in the first, 2, 3, 4 weeks or something like that, it's really about like keep moving forward, right? It can take time before you see positives, and when you see positives, really play them up. And there's one more thing I want to point out. Well, yeah, maybe not specifically to Rob here, but generally speaking, there are a lot of people who have kind of the anxiety about the sleep window, meaning it is very narrow, and I already have trouble sleeping, and the fact that kind of all sleep has to be in this sleep window can be kind of anxiety provoking. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, again, I think it's important to identify what it is specifically that's causing that concern. So I think Rob used the example that he feels that he has to fill that sleep window with sleep, and then understanding that that's not our actual intention, just that alone will hopefully relieve some of that worry and that anxiety. And I think just really it's a knowledge thing. You have to understand the rationale behind the sleep window, because if you don't understand why it's being suggested that you allot less time for sleep, it's quite understandable why it's going to cause worry and concern, especially if you're used to spending, say, 8 hours in bed every night, and then you read that maybe you should be spending 5.5 or 6 hours in bed at night. When you're already really concerned about sleep, it's only natural that you're going to feel worried about that. But if you just understand the rationale behind it, that look, at this stage, we're not looking to necessarily increase the amount of sleep you get. We're just trying to make it easier for you to fall asleep, to reduce the amount of time you spend awake during the night. And this in turn will make sleep a little bit easier, improve the quality of your sleep, and get you started down that road towards just building that sleep confidence back. You start to recognize that sleepiness at the start of the night. You start to spend a little bit less time awake during the night. You start to feel a little bit better during the day. So you worry a little bit less, then sleep starts to become a bit easier. You start spending more time asleep during that sleep window, then we can look to start extending the sleep window out. And that's another important consideration, that the sleep window isn't something you're going to be following for the rest of your life. This is just kind of a temporary measure to help get your sleep back on track. Just like if you break your leg and you need to get a plaster cast, we're not saying you need that plaster cast on for the rest of your life. We just need it on until you're feeling better, and then you won't need it anymore.
Very good, very important point. What was I wanted to comment on there? It was, I think, generally speaking, it's almost always the best thing to do is like keep going forward. Don't resist the temptation to always like fix things and tweak things.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to ask you about this one. Like sometimes I feel if somebody just cannot get past the kind of anxiety about having, let's say, a 6-hour sleep window, then what do you feel about the one that I think actually Michael, our good friend Michael, taught me, which was to say, well, keep the wake up time, but instead of saying don't go to bed before, let's say, midnight, then say I'm not going to check the time after 11. So you kind of have a bigger window, but you make a point of not checking the time and just go by how you feel. I feel that sometimes that can relieve a little bit of the anxiety, but again, it's you shouldn't start tweaking things. But general thoughts about that strategy?
Yeah, I do actually use that strategy with clients too, but typically when they're a little bit further along, just from the plain old implementation of sleep restriction, So if someone's seeing some improvement in their sleep, maybe they've tried extending the sleep window in the past and then felt that didn't really work. They kind of took a step back. Then just go back to your regular sleep window. But, an hour before the start, then you make that the last time you check the clock, and I always suggest that the hour before the start of the sleep window is like your buffer zone, just unwinding time, anything you find relaxing and enjoyable. And so you don't check the clock from that hour before. And then as soon as you feel sleepy, then you allow yourself to go to bed. But I think to start off with that can be a little bit difficult because, your urge is you really just want to go straight to bed, right away. So I think that it is a really good strategy, but one that in my experience works best once someone is familiar and has practiced implementing just regular sleep restriction, earliest possible bedtime, final out of bedtime. But they're starting to, maybe they don't feel confident enough to extend the sleep window officially, or maybe they've tried doing so in the past, hasn't worked for them. Then that can be a good option because it gives you that opportunity for a bit more sleep, but only if you are actually feeling sleepy enough to sleep.
And then I think before we move on to another question, I just want to make a final remark. I was about to do it before, but I forgot it, but now it popped up in my head again, which was the kind of sleep anxiety here. I feel like oftentimes the real improvement in sleep anxiety actually is a consequence of the sleep window, meaning when people start seeing that, 2 weeks in, 3 weeks in, 4 weeks in, whenever it is, that, oh, I fell asleep quicker that time. Oh, I fell back asleep. Oh, this is working. That is actually when sleep anxiety is reduced, rather than trying to do something specifically to reduce the sleep anxiety, right?
Yeah, I don't think there's really much we can do to reduce the anxiety apart from, just trying to figure out what those thoughts are that are creating the anxiety.
That we talked about, exactly.
Because just like there's not a thing that can generate sleep apart from your own biological sleep drive. There's not this magic solution to just remove all anxiety and negative thinking. But like you said, once you start to notice these results, and it's not to do necessarily with sleep duration. Once you find that it's starting to get a little bit easier to fall asleep,
right.
That in itself can just give you a little bit more confidence and worry less about sleep. And it kind of turns that vicious cycle on its head, and it becomes 100%. A more positive cycle of less worry and then a little bit better sleep.
Rob, hope you found this helpful, and stay in touch. Any follow-up questions, just email again. Cool. So now we have a question, it's pretty short question here from somebody. We don't really have a name. It's interesting. The name is like question mark ID, something like that. But here's the question. Hello, how are you? I've been following in the past. My problem is hypnic jerks. These do not make me sleep unless I'm very exhausted. And I don't know whether this harm leads to death, for example. Please inform me, what's the treatment? I wish you well. So I think, to summarize, somebody who has a lot of hypnic jerks, really worried about the health consequences and also what to do. What do you think, Martin?
This is a big one. This is a big topic. I think a lot of people experience this. I think the first thing to say is that they're pretty normal. The only time they could be a sign of anything unusual is, if sometimes you know more about this than I do, but sometimes sleep apnea can contribute to these, jerks awakening, more to do with those pauses in breath and you wake up, with a gasp. So that's always something to consider. But other than that, often they're just a regular symptom of sleep, as we transition from wakefulness to sleep. There are just some changes that go through our body. Our heart rate starts to slow, our breathing can start to slow, we start to lose, muscle constriction. And, sometimes people describe it as that sense of falling, and then because you're not quite asleep yet, your brain's like, well, we're falling, quick, wake up, we need to do something, don the parachutes kind of thing. So it could just be a normal transition into sleep, in which case, maybe that's something that we could reframe to be more welcoming towards it. Someone actually told me that once they learned more about this, they actually come to welcome these jerks, these starts, as a sign that sleep is coming. And then connected to that is just this hyper arousal, like if we have a lot of vigilance and we're just always checking to see if we're asleep or not, I think that can lead to more jerking awake. As we're kind of lying there, for example, and we're thinking, am I asleep yet? Am I asleep yet? Even if it's just on a subconscious level. And then as soon as you fall asleep, brain jerks you awake, says, hey, fell asleep. But obviously now you're awake again.
Right.
So I think that generally then that they're not anything really that you should be too concerned about. If you find that they're happening a lot and you're just kind of lying there wide awake, really struggling to fall asleep because of the concern that it might happen, that might be a good idea to just, get out of bed, do something else for a little while, just something you find relaxing and enjoyable, till you feel a little bit more calm and relaxed and sleepy again, and then return to bed and just, just see what happens. But again, they're not really anything to be too concerned about. Normally, they're just a sign that you're falling asleep, but they can also be a sign that you've just got a high level of arousal and self-monitoring around sleep.
Absolutely. And to kind of like spin off again of what you said about sleep apnea, I think it's not that hard to tell like the kind of normal hypnic jerks from the ones that happen with sleep apnea. The ones that happen with sleep apnea are typically like, throughout the night, people wake up with a body movement. And it's often, most of the time, it's actually their partners. The people that have them don't usually notice them. It's the partners tell them like you're kind of jerking all the time and you're snoring, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think, yes, it's so to answer this very kind of directly here, no, they have not been linked to any increase in like health problems or anything like that. Right. Absolute reassurance. And I think one thing to add, actually two things that I have. One is like, as we talked a lot about this on my channel, I've kind of like paid attention, thought about it. And me and my wife, we typically always watch some Netflix before we go to bed, in bed, to like people, which I like to point out. But anyway, I found out that the reason I know that it's time to go to bed, because she always falls asleep sooner than me, is that there's this like little jerk almost every single night. So I realized I think we all have them really often. I think they're really common. And final point I want to make is, I think when people start trying to do things to avoid them, that's kind of like insomnia in general. Like that's when you get into trouble. You try to do this, it still happens. I have to do something else, it still happens. Pay more attention and they get worse and worse, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think the kind of the thing is, don't worry about them and pay less attention. Like, and as Martin said, get out of bed, do other things and shift your attention. That will really, really help. And with that said, there is one comment here that I wanted to go over with you. And for those who want to read it, it's the comment on Inside number 291. In fact, that's from yesterday, where, by the way, I mentioned you were going to be in here. So I asked people to pop in with questions. And here's one from David. And he writes the following. My problem is I do everything else good. I eat fairly healthy, drink water, tone down my lights later in the night. But while I'm staying awake, I'll be on my couch watching videos around 10 p.m., waiting for the point where I'm completely tired. But then I'll pass out unexpectedly on the couch for usually 10 to 20 minutes. And now when I get out of the couch and go to my bed, my sleep isn't as deep or refreshing, and I'll only sleep for a couple hours. Insight, help on this topic.
This is a good one. I hear this a lot. You know, some people describe it as they lose that window of sleepiness somehow. And I think there are a few things that could help explain it, but I think the most likely one is just conditioned arousal. So in other words, because you've experienced so many nights of difficulty trying to sleep in your own bed, you kind of learned that being in bed is an unpleasant place to be, and it's associated with being awake and struggling rather than being sleepy, asleep, and relaxed and calm. So when you're out of bed, you're just relaxing on the couch. It's really easy to fall asleep, you know, because you're not in that place that you've associated with wakefulness and stress. So you're calm, you're relaxed, you're on a nice cozy couch, your mind's distracted, you're watching TV, you're not really thinking about sleep, you're not putting any pressure on yourself to sleep. So the result is you sleep, you know, and then you wake up. So let's say in this example, 20 minutes later, you go to bed and then you find that you're not really sleepy anymore. And that's not because you slept for 10 to 20 minutes. That's not going to have a big impact on your sleep drive. It's because you're now in that environment that you've associated with struggle. So of course your brain's expecting the struggle, so then you struggle. So ultimately, I think the best thing to do is, once you recognize that you're in bed and you're struggling, is to just get out of bed again, you know, until you feel calm and relaxed again, and then return to bed and just repeat the process. It really is kind of just like it was this long-term exposure to hard nights in your own bed is going to take like this conscious effort to remove yourself from bed when you're struggling, in order to relearn that the bed is a place where all you do is sleep, you know. So when you're struggling, you get out of bed, do anything that you find relaxing and enjoyable. You don't need to play around with the dimmer switches. You don't need to like stay away from drinking water or stay away from the TV or anything like that. The priority is to just, when you're struggling, get out of bed, you know, and it helps, if nothing else, it helps distract the mind. So you're not just in this dark room alone with your thoughts and your worries. You're getting out of bed, you're distracting yourself with something else, which often makes it easier for the mind to calm down. And you're also preventing that, reinforcing that association between your bed and wakefulness and struggle. So in conclusion, I would say that nothing there is that unusual, typically a symptom of conditioned arousal. And if I would say, just continue, you know, moving to bed when you feel sleepy. If you're in bed and you're calm, relaxed, you don't need to jump out of bed because the conditions are right for sleep. But if you start to feel worried and anxious, then get out of bed. Maybe just put another 20-minute show on Netflix, you know, or whatever. And then when you feel calm, relaxed again, then return to bed. It's just this repeated exposure and opportunity for sleep in your own bed that is where we want to get you to.
Absolutely. I gave two things that I want to kind of follow up on here, which is how, I think you already expressed that, you know, yeah, I agree. If somebody sleeps like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, it shouldn't really have that big impact. But do you feel that sometimes people underestimate? I feel sometimes I will get worried. Or I guess my question to you becomes this one. How important do you think it is for somebody to like really try to avoid falling asleep before going to bed?
I think it is important to make that your goal, not to go to bed before your sleep window begins, not to sleep anywhere other than your own bed. Because like I kind of touched upon earlier, our goal here is for you to associate your bed with sleep. And if you're going to sleep somewhere else, that's a missed opportunity, you know? So let's say you sleep, even if it's a short time, let's say you get an hour of sleep on the couch. That's an hour of sleep that you could have potentially got in your own bed, and reinforce this idea that your bed is a place for sleep, not your couch.
Absolutely. I think it's I agree with you that 10-15 minutes may not seem like that much, but you may be underestimating. And I think really work on trying to avoid falling asleep, even if it is short. And then the other thing, which I think is an important one, from in this comment, it starts off by talking about how, like, I do everything right. I eat healthy, I
Yeah.
exercise, etc. My mind, when I hear that, goes into the direction of, this is someone who is probably kind of health conscious, takes care of themselves, etc. And maybe have gone into the direction of either trying to exercise and live healthy to sleep, or maybe it's more just a sign that they are like a little bit of that have the traits that somebody with insomnia has. But your thoughts on this?
Yeah, that's because we hear these stories so often, like you and I, then we're really receptive to phrases like that, and I noticed that too. As soon as you started reading that comment, that email, I'm doing so many things, I'm trying so many things, or I've tried so many things. And often it's those efforts that perpetuate the insomnia, because ultimately we can't control sleep, and as soon as we try and control it, it kind of backfires on us and makes sleep more difficult. But at the same time, it's completely understandable why we want to put effort into sleep, because everything in life responds to effort in a positive way. So if we're at school, if we work hard, we study hard, we'll probably get better results. In our job, if we work hard, we rise above, we meet those deadlines, we do cost saving ideas, we put all that effort in, we might get a promotion. So and health conscious people are kind of the epitome of effort leading to success. If I work out more, I'll get fitter. I've got all these goals, these fitness goals. So it's quite natural that when we struggle with sleep, our first thing is to put more effort into sleep, research sleep, implement all these things to try and make sleep happen. But sleep is the one thing in life that responds negatively to effort. And as soon as we put that effort into sleep, it backfires on us. And that can just lead to so much worry and anxiety, because throughout our whole life, anytime we've put effort into something, we've noticed some positive results. But now we're putting effort into sleep, and our sleep's maybe even getting even worse. And so we start to think that there's something really wrong with us now. Whereas in fact, that's normal. Our sleep responds negatively to effort, and sleep will happen all by itself. It's only when we tend to get involved in it that sleep becomes a problem.
Absolutely. And I think, I don't know if you saw this, but I sent a tweet that kind of summarizes this, that, the sleep universe, everything is upside down. Like,
Yes.
the hard work is punished and doing nothing is rewarded, something like that. And so I think, final note to David here is, I think if you, eating good, being active, drinking water are all good things. Like, taking care of your health is amazing. That's good. Of course you should do that. But don't do anything with the purpose of kind of like trying to sleep more. That always backfires, as we talked about. Cool. So I think we have maybe two more emails. And then just a quick question more here. Now, this is an email that came in here, actually just 7 hours ago, and it was titled "Crippled by Fear." Hi, Daniel. I was wondering if it is possible to be so consumed with fear of having sporadic fatal insomnia that you can actually develop symptoms that mimic the disease. Basically, what happened is that I came across the disease accidentally on an insomnia group. I've had bouts of insomnia before, but because I had no idea about SFI, I always overcame it and ended up fine. My sleep has gradually worsened over the course of the month. I would be able to sleep normal some nights, and then I would be able to get maybe 5 hours, then maybe 3, and now I get none. I would fall asleep like normal, wake up in the night, be able to fall back asleep, and then become unable to fall back asleep after the nightly wake up. Now I seem unable to fall asleep at all. I lay in bed with racing heart. I'm alert all night long without being able to relax. The second that I feel like I may be falling asleep, I snap back to the racing heart, alertness. It feels like I have literally lost the ability to sleep. I'm absolutely terrified. I feel almost as though my mind has been conditioned to go into this alert mode as soon as sleep even becomes a thought. I become anxious, panicky. I'm terrified of going to bed. I've tried ZQL with no luck, from Lauren. So I can, like, we can switch it up here, Martin. So I can start commenting, and then you can comment on my thoughts to change things. So I think, obviously when you read this, it's like, this is somebody that really, has gone down the rabbit hole, like really struggled to sleep. And Lauren, I really feel for you, But again, know that it's not unusual. It's not unusual to have this, like, sense of having completely lost the ability to sleep, having all this fear, etc. And, I want to start off with actually maybe commenting on like how this all started. Like, you've had trouble sleeping here and there, but you've gotten past it. But this time you went onto one of these online insomnia groups. Generally speaking, not a good idea to go there for many reasons. One is that on these groups online, there are a lot of people on those groups that have this almost like insomnia identity. Insomnia is like part of who they are, and they want to belong to this group. There's little incentive for them to tell you something that's kind of reassuring, because that's part of being in a group. Secondly, there's really no accountability. People say all kinds of things, and so when you have that urge to find out more information, like for everyone out there, like, if you are in a place of like you're sleeping pretty good, your sleep confidence is good, you don't have any trouble, then you can actually, you can research this stuff and Google stuff. But when you have trouble sleeping, you should really try to avoid that. That's number one. I've talked a lot about like sporadic fatal insomnia on this channel, so I don't want to spend too much time there. But I do want to alert anybody out there that in a comment on Insomnia Insight number 284. One of the commenters actually goes over how you nowadays, I cannot verify this, but this person seems to be pretty sure, you can actually, if you feel this is necessary, do one of those 23andMe, like sequence your genome and find out if you have this, genetic mutation that is associated with this fatal insomnia. So I think if this is true, which it seems to be, that could actually help a lot of people that have this fear. Now, so, okay, we had this, Lauren has gone down this kind of really deep into the rabbit hole of insomnia, like really feels everything is hopeless. And I think what I want to say is that, you're not alone. This is not uncommon at all. And what should you do? Well, it really the same applies for everyone. It's what I call set it and forget it. Like, spend less time in bed, get up early, stay awake during the day, go to bed later. And other than that, like, try to shift your attention. And, a classic problem is like, how do I keep myself from thinking about this all the time? The urge to research, etc. Well, you cannot control your thoughts and emotions, but you can control your actions. So I would say, try to do things during the day that you enjoy. Get out there, talk to people, distract yourself. The more you shift your attention away from thinking about sleep, away from researching it, then the more you will sleep. So those are kind of my initial reactions. And with that said, over to you, Morgan.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that you said there. I think first and foremost, it's important to recognize that that's the story that was just shared isn't particularly unusual. Lots of people with chronic insomnia would, I think, who are listening to this will identify with those concerns, and this research leading you down this rabbit holes of, do I have this? Do I have that? How is this going to end? So hopefully that's a bit reassuring, because there are many people who have a very similar story, but have got through their insomnia and are sleeping better because they've implemented these cognitive and behavioral techniques that you talk about all the time in your channel and I talk about on my channel all the time. So hopefully that's a little bit reassuring. I think it's also important to recognize that, we don't lose our ability to sleep. Sleep is not an ability, it's just a core biological function. It's something that never goes away. If we're awake for long enough, we'll always sleep. It's just that our thoughts and our behaviors can interrupt this process and make it more difficult. It's kind of akin to holding our breath. We can't actually control our breathing. In the short term, we can. We can take a deep breath and hold our breath. But because breathing is a core biological function, the body will eventually take over and make us breathe. And sleep is like that too. So just like this person recognized, they said, I can't sleep, I've lost the ability to sleep. But earlier on, they mentioned, oh, there was a night I got 3 hours of sleep, or there was a night, I got 2 hours of sleep. So the sleep is there. There's evidence that sleep is happening. It's probably just this really heightened worry and all these efforts around sleep and all this ongoing research that is making sleep a bit more difficult. So, again, like you suggested, looking into these CBTi techniques is probably a really good way forward for this person, and to try and avoid this endless research, this ongoing questioning and ongoing evaluation, to just focus on techniques that have worked for countless other people in exactly the same situation. And just engage with them and just try and stay committed and consistent with them. And I'm pretty confident that she will get results.
Absolutely. And a few more things this is nice having you here, Marty, because as you're talking, I have time to reflect upon
right.
This is really, really good. I'm happy you brought up, like, you cannot lose the ability to sleep. It's so important. I was just going to go there. Another thing, when you hear this story, it often, kind of a follow-up question from the person that has these problems is often, can all this really be just anxiety? Is that all it is? And it can be totally. It often is all anxiety. Or I think where we often use hyperarousal, when your mind is kind of this, like, very, like, hyper alert, hyper aware state, just like super aware of what's going on. You're monitoring your thinking and all that. That can cause all kinds of things. Like, a question here was like, could, like, insomnia, like, provoke these kind of symptoms mimicking sporadic fatal insomnia? Well, I can definitely share this. Hyperarousal can cause all kinds of things, like jerks, twitches, feeling like you don't have balance. You can't find words. Your memory is off. You're in a brain fog. Tingling sensations, like, all of those things can definitely be caused by hyperarousal.
Yeah, absolutely. And just recognizing that, because I think everyone who struggles with chronic insomnia recognizes that there's an element of anxiety and worry. I'm still waiting to hear from that person with chronic insomnia who tells me they have no worry or anxiety whatsoever surrounding sleep. It is a major component. But there's also, these behavioral issues too, these behaviors that we implement in a bid to improve our sleep, like spending more time in bed, canceling our plans for the day, trying to conserve energy, all these things that, are an additional barrier to sleep, that can make sleep more difficult. But even that in itself is still connected to worry and anxiety, because then when we have these behaviors that make sleep more difficult, because sleep is still difficult, even though we're implementing all these behaviors, then we become even more concerned, and it just feeds into this vicious cycle of more worry and more difficulty sleeping.
Absolutely. So I want to say, let's see, was this Lauren? Yeah, Lauren, hang in there. Hope this was helpful, and, come back with any more questions. And before we move on to, I think, the last email, and there's just another quick question, but I think the last email is going to be the one where we spend a little more time. As you said, I've really not come across a single person who doesn't have some component of anxiety. Well, you will have these clients, and I'm sure you have them, that tell you that I'm not worried at all. It's just I cannot sleep. This paradoxical insomnia where people are like, I go 2 hours, but I feel completely normal. But in reality, the story is a little different, right? You kind of know where I'm going with this, Martin?
Yeah, I get people that tell me that when they wake during the night, for example, and then they find it really hard to fall back to sleep, but I don't have anything going through my mind at this point. That's a common one.
Yeah.
So typically what I would suggest in those circumstances is maybe it's just pure and simple a sleep drive issue. Maybe you've got enough sleep. If really you're waking and you're not feeling sleepy anymore, you're not feeling worried, you're not feeling concerned, you're getting through the day just fine, maybe it's just as simple as you've gotten enough sleep.
Right. It could be as simple as that. You're not sleepy. That could be it. And if you're not anxious, totally. But it can also be, and tell me if you disagree here, Martin, but I find there are some people who in the beginning kind of are like, I don't feel anxious. I feel normal. I just have all this energy. But then, after a while you realize, or they realize that, you know what, I actually have some hyperarousal. I was kind of worried, but I didn't really word it that way. I didn't realize it or recognize it that way. But I feel like a clue is that if you are thinking a lot about your sleep, you're here and asking me questions, you probably are to some degree worried about your sleep, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it's important that you just touched upon this, that hyperarousal isn't just about anxiety.
Yep.
It also just involves self-monitoring, for example. So you could be waking during the night, feeling pretty calm, but you're just constantly monitoring for sleep. You're just, am I feeling sleepy? Am I falling asleep? Am I going to fall asleep? And just that brain activity could be the barrier. So it might not be explicitly recognizable as high levels of worry or anxiety, but it's still that shadow of arousal. It's still arousal that could be getting in the way.
Exactly. I think for all the people out there who have this kind of paradoxical insomnia where I feel like I sleep super little and I don't feel worried, maybe you have some hyperarousal going on after all. So that said, it's funny. I made this video, my usual like kind of quick Insomnia Insight video yesterday, and I said, if you have any questions, please let me know. And I got an email 2 hours ago from someone that we both know very well, which is Ellen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. And so she had a couple of questions for me and Martin. And it is Ellen. We both love you, and I know you won't take offense here, but pretty long email, a very long email from Ellen. So I can't read the whole thing, Ellen, but I kind of read through it, and I think I have kind of the two questions here. And by the way, we should always start with positive things. Which also I want to read the first thing here. And it says, "Hi Daniel, I've been meaning to email you to tell you how well I am doing. How well I'm doing. I'm sleeping, 6 hours or more, and I much better than any pre-insomnia." So she's like the key thing here. She's saying that she's doing well. She's no longer deliberating. She's not researching insomnia, etc. But sometimes she stumbles across things and she has some questions. So success story, really. It's amazing. I'm super happy to hear this, Ellen. Now, so what she says here is that she has heard from, experts and other people online that there are these sleep cycles. Like you should sleep at least 90 minutes and you should try to get like 4 to 5 cycles in. And the question is, and she says, I think it's just going to create more anxiety for people if they're told they need these cycles, etc. But the question is, where was the specific question? I think the question is like, how important is it to get, like, how important are these sleep cycles, and how important is it to get like X amount of these cycles in?
It goes back to what we were discussing earlier. It's just this thing that the body takes care of by itself. And it's only when we try and get involved that we disrupt the process. So we have no control over how many sleep cycles we're going to get at night. We don't really have any control over how much time we're going to spend in each stage of sleep. It's something that the body does by itself, and it adjusts on a nightly basis according to how well or how poorly we slept the night before. So it's really something that is just a distraction. It's something we don't need to be concerned about. It's something the body takes care of by itself. It's kind of like worrying about how many blood cells are in our little finger.
Right.
It makes no
Right.
difference, and worrying about it is just going to be completely counterproductive. So really, that's as far as I would go there. I don't know if you have more insight on the medical side of this, but for me, I just say it's something that you should not really be concerned with at all.
I agree 100%. And I think these sleep cycles are almost like completely academic. Like you
Yeah.
know, you go into stage, stage one, then stage two, stage three, then you have some REM and then back. That really only happens in textbooks. It's not
Mm.
real. It is not real. And there's no benefit to getting this much REM sleep. There's no benefit to getting this little, etc. So it's a complete distraction. My quote, which I usually use, is the one about like it's like worrying about the composition of gases in air.
Mm.
Can't do anything about it. And by the way, a little bit of a side note here, but I have to bring this one up because it's something I just thought about, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it. You know how we both feel like trackers are almost never a good idea, but lately I've been thinking like trackers are almost like the perfect recipe for chronic insomnia, because you have a person that is health conscious by default. Like if you use the tracker, you're probably interested in your health. It gives you all this like tracking data and sleep cycles and stuff like that. And then by default, you're supposed to now track this and kind of tweak things. So I'm thinking like trackers are like, they're terrible.
Yeah. When clients first enroll with me, and I go through the process of like filling in a sleep log. I tell people, please don't use an activity tracker, because first and foremost, look, what are we trying to do here? We're trying to get you to be happier with your sleep, to enjoy better sleep. It's purely subjective. The numbers don't really matter. So when you're filling out a sleep log, all we're really trying to do is just look for, are you spending too much time in bed? Do you have a really inconsistent out of bed time? But other than that, we're just looking, how would you rate last night's sleep? On a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, how would you rate the quality of your day? 1 to 5, 1 to 10. It's just so subjective. We just want you to report on how you feel. And the issue with these sleep trackers is they give you overwhelming amounts of data that may not be accurate, especially in people with insomnia. They tend to really struggle. And a lot of the data that they give you is unactionable. Like you spent X minutes in stage 2 sleep, N2 sleep. There's nothing you can do to modify
Right.
that.
What do you do with that? Exactly.
So first of all, it might not be accurate, and second of all, there's nothing you can really do with it, and third, it just leads to more worry about sleep and more sleep
Absolutely.
efforts. So yeah, that's one of the first things that I suggest to people. If you're struggling with sleep and you can recognize that you have worry about sleep sleep tracking devices, don't bother with them. Then they tend to be more of a barrier, more of an obstacle, more of a hindrance than help.
100%. 100%. Thanks for the input. And okay, second question is about paradoxical insomnia. And Ellen describes how that, may have happened. But her question is this: is it really pathological to not know for sure that you've fallen asleep? In the past, it certainly wasn't helpful since it would lead to frustration or anxiety, but now it doesn't. I do tell myself that there's any doubt whether I slept, just assume it and accept it. But I don't understand a normal, good sleeper. How do they know if they've been asleep? Is it more that they know that they haven't been awake more? Is that how they know they haven't slept? It's kind of a meta thing. But how do you know you're asleep when you're sleeping? So that's kind of one thing. How do you know you're enjoying sleeping is another question I'm asked. No, so that was kind of like a little slow. But I think the main thing is here, like, is it pathological to not to know if you're sleeping or not? And how do people in general know that they've slept? I'll let you start this one.
Okay. I think that it's down to, this arousal again. It's this self-monitoring, so here's an example. If you talk to someone who doesn't think about sleep, just considers themselves not to have any issues with sleep, and you say to them, how much sleep did you get last night? All they do is think about, well, okay, I got into bed at 11 o'clock. I got out of bed at 6 in the morning. So I slept 7 hours. But you talk to someone with insomnia, and they may say something like, well, I got into bed at 11 o'clock. It took me probably about an hour and a half. I fell asleep. Then I woke up and I was awake for like maybe 20 minutes. And then I fell back to sleep and maybe I got another hour. Then I woke up. And you've got this really granular introspection about about that night of sleep. So then you come out of it at the end and you're like, yeah, maybe I got like 3 hours of sleep. And I think it's just that attention. You're paying so much attention to how much sleep you get and how much time you're spending awake, that it makes it more difficult for your brain to just shut down, and just relax and take a breather. And so you can kind of struggle to separate sleep from wakefulness on reflection. So you'll wake up in the morning, you'll get out of bed and you'll be like, I got no idea. Like, was that how much sleep I got? Because you're remembering all those times you were awake during the night and all that tossing and turning. And that can kind of feed into that uncertainty. So again, I think, it's like with anything related to insomnia, these cognitive and behavioral techniques are so helpful, especially allotting an appropriate amount of time for sleep. If you can build that sleep drive, reduce the amount of time you're spending awake during the night, further consolidate sleep, it can really reduce this high level of arousal and this self-monitoring, and just improve sleep quality. So you're not really questioning as much what is sleep, what is wakefulness during the night.
Absolutely.
I hope that made sense.
No, I think it made a lot of sense. And to kind of answer that first question, is it pathological not to know if you've fallen asleep or not? No, it's completely normal, actually. I think almost anyone can relate to this. I can definitely relate to it. My wife has woken me up, and I was like, what are you talking about? I was awake. Happens all the time. Or the opposite, I wake her up and she's like, I didn't fall asleep. No, a lot. So it's not pathological at all. And like you said, most people that have no trouble sleeping, they actually don't know. They have no clue actually how much they sleep. They just estimate and they overestimate. So they actually don't know whether they slept or not. So that whole thing is completely normal and expected, really.
Yeah, because I think, to recognize that you're definitely asleep, how can you do that? You have to be awake to recognize something, right?
Right.
So it makes sense that you're not going to know when you're awake or you're asleep, really. Like, why do we expect that? Because when you're asleep, and so you're not going to know you're asleep, if that makes sense. So I think it's just another one of these things that can also be distracting in a way.
Exactly.
It's not really something to worry too much about. Just really the quality of your sleep. The best way to reflect on that is how your days are. If you feel like you're getting through the day with enough energy, then you're probably getting enough sleep.
100%. 100%. Quick last one here. This is from Jay, who has written me many questions over the past several months. And so I know him very well. It's going to be new for you, Martin, but it's just a quick question here. He said, so Jay's one of these people that really worried about having sporadic fatal insomnia. And I think, has gotten to a point where he sleeps much more than the past couple of months, but it's, the worry is still there, which is reflected in this question. Thanks a lot. One thing about SFI, there are low-grade cancers and stuff, like diseases that spread really slowly. Medical professionals don't know how much about SFI. And do you think it's possible that SFI can be low-grade as well? And I can start answering this question, which is, first of all, last time I checked, there have been like 30 people in the history of, documented medicine that have been known to have this thing called sporadic fatal insomnia. We know very little about it. There is like no expert. And so I can definitely say that there's no evidence whatsoever that there can be a formal, like, slowly progressing SFI. And again, it's almost like the trackers and many other things we talked about here. It is, it's impossible to answer a question like that. Could there be a slowly progressing form of disease that can cause, like, you can never get to the bottom of that question. The question in itself is problematic because the more time you spend trying to figure it out, could it be this, could it be that, could it be that, that is going to feed so much anxiety and insomnia. And I'll go to the go-to place now that I've been using, which is the existential questions that we all, or many of us at least, have when we're teenagers, when we're growing up, which is like, where does the universe extend? Like, what's the meaning of life? What's the purpose? sometimes it can feel like when you talk to people, you research, you feel like you're getting closer to like the answer. There's clues here and there, but in reality, there is no answer, you know. And the key for me, and for I think many, is that we learn to accept that there is no answer, and we kind of live with that, and we can live very happily knowing that we never got to the bottom of those questions. So I think, Jay, those are my thoughts on that topic. And anything to add, Martin?
Yeah, I don't think I really have anything to add to that. I mean, I would just say, why is it that we don't know much about this condition? And it's because it pretty much doesn't exist.
Right.
What's the population in the world? What was it last count? Maybe 7 or 8 billion. How many documented cases have there been of this condition? As a proportion of the global population, what is that? It's something that's so minuscule. It's probably the most minuscule thing that we could ever worry about. Ultimately, it should be way on the bottom of our list of concerns. But it's understandable why it is a concern, because when you have chronic insomnia, it can feel as though something is seriously wrong and there is something very unusual going on. But ultimately, chronic insomnia is just, it can be caused by any number of things. The initial trigger, as many people as there are in the world, there are that number of initial triggers of sleep disruption. But for chronic insomnia, when it just becomes a few nights of sleeplessness into a longer term problem, it's always because of our thoughts and our behaviors. The way we think about sleep changes. The behaviors we implement in a bid to improve our sleep that backfire and make sleep more difficult. These are the things that perpetuate the problem and turn what would otherwise just be a short period of insomnia into a longer term problem. And this is why CBTi techniques are so effective, because they change the way we think about sleep and they help us implement behaviors that are constructive, and they're a collection of skills, so they're with us for life. So they're really a long-term solution. So I think that worrying about all these other things serves as a distraction that just increases worry. I think it's far more constructive to just research CBTi techniques and really give them a good go. That's how I'm going to end that one.
That is always the answer. Always the answer. Okay, super. It was super fun having you on, Martin. And I'll leave, your insomniacoach.com, of course, is where to reach you if people need some more support and whatnot. Any concluding remarks?
No, I mean, it's been enjoyable coming on. Hopefully we can do it again soon. I would just like to leave people, that your insomnia isn't really unusual or unique. It affects people in all different ways, but insomnia is quite predictable. When I hear stories from people with insomnia, when they describe their insomnia to me, I'm still waiting to be surprised by something they tell me, because insomnia has far more in common from person to person than differences. So that should be reassuring, that if you have chronic insomnia, there's nothing particularly unusual going on. So there are ways to get through it. Just as other people have had insomnia and they've implemented CBTi techniques to improve their sleep, you can too. You never lose the ability to sleep. There is hope, and you can get your sleep back on track.
Exactly right. And as I was preparing to this morning, I was actually going to say, I'm going to end it with, should you say it or should I say it? You can sleep. All right. Well, Martin, super nice having you, and we'll be back. We'll do this again soon. All right.
Absolutely. Pleasure.
Bye-bye.